Ukraine claims to have inflicted major losses on Russia during an epic battle near Vuhledar.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says his country will reach NATO's 2% defence budget and has called on China not to supply weapons to Russia.
Ukraine is claiming that Russia has lost at least 130 tanks and armoured personnel carriers in a 3-week battle near the southern Ukrainian town of Vuhledar. This footage was released last week, showing a Russian tank being targeted in the area. But Ukrainian officials are now describing an epic battle, inflicting a stinging setback on Moscow. The claims have not been independently verified. In the meantime, what is clear is that Russian shelling has left a trail of destruction in the town. In Bakhmut, Ukraine's Azov fighters are still defending the beleaguered city. Russia is determined to take Bakhmut, but it's more of a political prize than of any military importance. Both sides have lost many soldiers.
Бахмут — это тяжелое место, тяжелая такая территория, за которой доводится вести бои. Слишком большое скопление пехоты противника. У них стоит цель, и они кидают сюда все ресурсы.
President Zelensky has said the Ukrainian military may still decide to withdraw its forces from Bakhmut. We're not going to sacrifice all of our people just for nothing, he said. And as the war grinds on, civilians in Chasiv Yar, a city less than 10 kilometers from Bakhmut, adapt to life under the threat of increased shelling. Without heating, they also try to repair what has been damaged and destroyed and carry on.
The death toll from an overnight strike on Zaporizhia in Ukraine has risen to 3. Rescuers managed to pull around 20 others from the rubble. The search for further survivors continued once daylight broke. Military officials in Zaporizhia said the apartment block appeared to have been struck by an S-300 missile. Since the outbreak of the war, Russia has launched multiple missile and artillery attacks on civilian targets, including residential homes.
One year ago, the European Union opened its doors to Ukrainians fleeing Russia's invasion by activating the so-called Temporary Protection Directive. It was an unprecedented decision that enabled as many as 4 million people to stay in the EU until March 2024. Nearly 12 months later, and the European Commissioner for Home Affairs tells Euronews that the EU did well to manage, after showing her extracts from our reporting on the ground.
Мати спокій, бо мені постійно приходиться якісь робити папіри, які то закінчуються, то кінець року, і я не маю ніякого спокою, щоб займатися навчанням та вихованням доньки.
So basically, what can be done, in your opinion, to fasten these procedures that the refugees are facing?
Well, of course, we have a lot of challenges. I mean, we are hosting 4 million Ukrainian refugees. This is really a huge, huge challenge, of course, for the whole Europe, and especially for those member states that are most affected, like Czech Republic, Estonia, Poland, but also Germany. But I think really to have a perspective, if somebody has asked me 1 year ago, before the war broke up, will Europe be able to manage 4 million new refugees as well as we have done this? I think very few should have been asked positively without any hesitation. So taking into account the huge challenges, I think that the achievements are really great.
Other issues of concerns seem to be housing and work for Ukrainian refugees, as we can see in the next video.
Migrants are more or less adapted, right? But now there is an issue of their access to labor market, massive problem of apartments. This is the time that we need to think of more long-term strategy.
But I think this interview really shows where we are right now. We are moved away from the emergency situation and are now into dealing with other issues. We have already more than 600,000 Ukrainians working. We have another like 400,000 that are registered in the public employment service. So that means that approximately half of the refugees in working age are more or less on the labor market. That's not so bad, but of course we need to do more. We have 750,000 children in our schools, but what was also mentioned here, housing, of course, is a challenge in many, many regions and towns.
Do you think that this instrument, this temporary protection directive, could be used again in other cases in the future?
Yes, I think so. I think it has proven that it works. I mean, just imagine if you compare to 2015, for example, where people were fleeing from the war in Syria, and the EU did not activate the temporary protection directive that existed already then but was not activated. And that left us also in a situation where we were very much divided on the issue on migration and refugees and asylum. And a lot of asylum systems were really clogged up with a lot of asylum applications. There were long waiting times. Now, of course, there are challenges. I will not deny that. But I think we are dealing with this refugee crisis in a much, much better way. Maybe it's not even a crisis, even though it's the biggest number of refugees since the Second World War.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has reiterated his support for Ukraine before the Bundestag and announced that he will increase the German defence budget to at least 2% of GDP to meet the target agreed with NATO. Scholz referred to the special fund of 100 billion euros created after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and called on China not to provide arms to Russia.
Meine Botschaft an Peking ist klar. Nutzen Sie Ihren Einfluss in Moskau, auf den Rückzug russischer Truppen zu drängen, und liefern Sie keine Waffen an den Aggressor Russland. Bleibt die Frage, ist Putin überhaupt bereit, über die Rückkehr zu diesen Grundsätzen und einen gerechten Frieden zu verhandeln? Im Moment spricht nichts dafür.
Scholz travels to Washington on Thursday for talks with US President Joe Biden. He said that, quote, every decision ensures that NATO does not become belligerent.
La riforma delle pensioni voluta dal presidente francese Emmanuel Macron ha portato in piazza milioni di persone da gennaio. Cosa significa questa riforma per la Francia, ma cosa significa per l'Europa? Ne parliamo su Euronews Witness.
It's been more than 10 years since trade unions in France united against the government. President Macron's proposed pension reform wants to raise the minimum retirement age from 62 to 64, with 43 years of contributions. The union's call to strike is seeing a massive response from the public.
C'est très dur, surtout à mon âge. Parce qu'en principe, à mon âge, on ne devrait pas faire de la livraison. C'est pénible pour le dos, c'est stressant, c'est fatigant, ça joue sur le moral.
Some European countries have higher retirement ages and don't fully understand why the French are so angry.
Un Suédois ou un Allemand va dire mais ils travaillent jamais, ils sont 35 heures, ils sont tout le temps en vacances. Et en fait, c'est cette densification du travail. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a certes moins d'années travaillées, moins de gens en emploi, et du coup, ceux qui travaillent, ils travaillent plus dur.
France has one of the highest productivity levels in Europe. Workers are producing more in less time, but this comes at a cost.
Souvent, les aides-soignantes, elles sont en arrêt, longue maladie, invalidité. Je ne sais pas si le gouvernement va être gagnant à nous prolonger de 2 ans l'âge de départ à la retraite pour les soignants.
Carbon emissions hit a record high in 2022, according to the International Energy Agency, rising by 0.9% compared to the previous year. countries switching to coal from gas to generate electricity was a principal cause for the increase. That happened after Russia's invasion of Ukraine pushed oil and gas prices higher. The agency says a rebound in air travel following the easing of pandemic restrictions was also a factor. However, despite the record, the rise was lower than expected. Catalonia in northern Spain is to enforce new water restrictions on nearly 6 million people due to a drought that has lasted more than 2 years. The measures will affect more than 200 municipalities, including Barcelona and Girona. The main water system in the region is at 27% capacity, thanks to 25 months of hardly any rain. Private gardens and public spaces will no longer be watered, and agricultural activities will have to reduce their water usage by 40%. Spain is not alone in having to deal with drought conditions. Italy, France and other nations in Western Europe are grappling with the second year of too little rain and snow. French Junior Environment Minister Béranger Couillard is warning action must be taken to avert a massive water crisis.
Je pense évidemment à l'utilisation des eaux grises, la réutilisation des eaux usées traitées, qui sont trop faibles dans notre pays par rapport à nos pays voisins. On est vraiment en retard. Aussi, c'est d'avoir en fait un plan d'ensemble pour justement faire en sorte qu'on ait des canalisations qui soient aussi remis à niveau, parce qu'on a beaucoup de fuites dans notre pays, entre environ 30% de fuites dans notre pays, et avec des territoires qui peuvent connaître des fuites jusqu'à 70%.
In Western Europe, nations are now scrambling to plan for a parched future.